We're live. Greetings in the love and light of the one infinite creator. I'm Andrii Zvorygin, and this is a peak oil chat, the Manhattan project of figuring out how much oil we have left and things like that. And we're joined by renowned guest Art Berman today. He will be starting us off with a presentation. And we also have Simon Michaux, Charlie Hall, and many other prominent figures. All right, go ahead, Art.
Okay, so I presume that most people or everybody have read my two posts on peak oil that were both published here in the last week. And really, everything I have to say is in there, but I thought it would be useful to highlight some of the key data points that are important, I think, to me and should be to everyone. And let me start by saying, even though I've said it in the post, um, I am not disputing the truth of peak oil. I 100% believe that the world will reach a point or a moment in which we start to see the results of not having enough oil to power our civilization. What I am disputing is that that model is relevant in the terms in which it was eloquently stated in 1998 by Colin Campbell and John Le Herrera, insofar as that peak, first of all, is in fact a symmetrical peak, as it's been uh, portrayed, and you can take a look at John's latest version on the right hand side of the screen. I don't think that is a realistic presentation. I'm not disputing the quality or the input. I'm just saying that's not the way data says it's working. So I don't think there's going to be a symmetrical peak and then rapid decline as shown. But more importantly, I think it's not imminent, um, which doesn't in any way change my view that it will happen. But it's been presented for 20 years as if it's right around the corner, and we need to get ready because it's going to be real serious. And basically, peak oil has lost its credibility because that didn't happen. Now, I'm not criticizing anybody. As you guys know, I mean, I was very much involved in peak oil. So any criticism that you may take from my comments here or my posts reflect directly back on me also. Um, I'm saying that, I was wrong about many things, and I think peak oil was wrong about many things, and all I'm doing is acknowledging what those many things were. So going back to Campbell and La Herrera, what they said was, look, we think that the world is very much dependent upon OPEC right now for its oil livelihood. And that's a really bad thing because non OPEC production is at best flat. And I 100% agree that that was the case from like 2004 to certainly 2010 or 11, and that we're going to be beholden to those guys and plugging in kind of the Jeffrey Bound export land model as those countries, their populations grow and they start to consume more and more of their own oil, less and less will be available for us, and that's a big problem. And those were all completely valid and legitimate points to make in 1998. Conditions changed, and peak oil did not adapt to changing conditions. And so, a tale of two views of reality, both cannot be true. On the right is the peak oil view that persists. I think this chart is dated January 2025. On the upper left is a chart that I made, which is real. I mean, this is the real data, and you can argue, well, we just have to go, to the right a little bit, and it's going to look like Jean's, but that's not the trend, nor the forecasts by any of the credible agencies. And we can talk about, how credible you guys think they are, but I don't think that they're 100% wrong. And then there's the slide down at the bottom, or the graph at the bottom, which just came out last week and looks very much like some of the longer term projections, which I have made. This is actually by um, one of the big oil trading companies. And, we can argue the details. I mean, does it look exactly like that? Does it decline more quickly? But I mean, I think notionally, that is the view that seems to be unfolding, and that I sort of subscribe to. That we're reaching what I call a peak plateau, and then it's going to decline, but it's not going to decline very quickly unless something happens that we don't know about. And obviously, business as usual is it's a terrible way to go forward, but that's sort of the way we do it. And I've done scenarios and I've shown them publicly, so I don't want to get into the details. So here we have, this is crude and condensate, world crude and condensate production in orange. It's 5-year average in blue, and then Brent price, which is expressed in December 2024 dollars per barrel. And first point, I show here the era of peak oil, 2004 to 2014, in which things looked like, they were moving in that direction. Prices had climbed from an average of $39 a barrel, again in today's dollars, to an average of $118 a barrel for those 10 years. And then something else happened, which is mostly unconventional oil, and prices have fallen down to an average of $77 since then. Now, as I have stated and will continue to state, one of the takeaways from just this part of the graph is that Colin and Jean were right in many ways. I mean, the age of cheap oil is over. The average price of oil since 2015 is pretty much double what it was before 2004. That is undeniable, and that is true. Okay, that doesn't mean, however, that that we're falling off the edge of the world. The other thing I want to point out is, there. I mean, we look at, if you look in the upper right of the crude and condensate curve, and you see that it's kind of rolling over. Okay, and some people point to that and say, "See, aha, we've reached it." Well, not really. And that's why I show the 5-year average. You can't just show uncalibrated data, because there are seasonal variations that account for its ups and downs. And I'm not trying to make any huge point here, except to say, this is how markets and industry think. And to my understanding, those of us in peak oil, certainly not a decade or so ago, we never looked at things the way that the rest of the world did. We had our own view. It was valid and legitimate to us, but that's not the way the rest of the world looked at it. And so, this crude and condensate curve does sort of seem to be rolling over, but so is the 5-year average. Okay, so we're still above the 5-year average. And in fact, crude and condensate production has almost always been above the 5-year average, except during periods of recession. And 2020, COVID was one of them, and the great financial crisis was another. And there was a recession back at the beginning of the 2000s, which was another. And if I had taken this chart back a few more years, we could find some others. So, it's not quite as straightforward as, oh, well, crude and condensate is declining, therefore we're right. Not exactly. Now, on the question of reserves, look, I'm not going to try to defend reserves. Reserves are a slippery slope, okay? But I mean, you can't just say they're not real, and they're concocted by a bunch of whatevers. And what I'm showing here is I've taken um, world proved reserves, and this comes from the successor to the BP annual energy statistics, this outfit called EI, who had always prepared it anyway. And I've taken all the tar sands from Canada and Venezuela out of it because those are, to me, those are the big fudge factors that I don't know how to deal with. So I've taken them out, and all I'm showing here is in blue is proved reserves, in white is remaining years of reserves at current consumption, and then I'm also showing what production has done, which is essentially depletion, if you will, in the yellowish orange curve. And what it shows to me is that we've pretty much always had 30 or 40 years of reserve cover. And there's an awful lot of analysts and smart people that would point out, gee, we're just not adding reserves the way we used to. And in fact, that was, a component of Campbell and La Herrera's paper in Scientific American. But what I want to point out is that, commercial companies are not in the business of stockpiling spare capacity. If we've got 35 or 36 years of capacity as a world, I mean, a commercial company doesn't just keep going after more and more and more because there's no return for that. I mean, they've got to show their shareholders some kind of return on investment. And oil in the ground is just a cost. You've spent the money and you're not monetizing it. So if you've got a third of a century of supply, assuming no more were to be found, there's not any reason for a company that's beholden to its investors to say, oh, we got to go after more. Now, a state-owned company like Saudi Aramco, to name one, that's a different story. They're more beholden to investors today than they were before, but um, this is the reality. And so when people say, oh, the companies are underinvesting, well, um, not according to the companies and not according to the people that give them money. In fact, a lot of investors say you're spending too much on growing reserves. That's certainly the message over the last 5 years. Now, where I think peak oil is wrong, and this is the only place that I'm going to say peak oil is wrong. A lot of people have come back and said, "Oh, you've said peak oil is wrong," and find where I said it's wrong in any of those posts. I never said it was wrong. What I said is wrong is to ignore unconventional oil. And so on this chart, I'm showing all sources of energy that I know of, primary energy, from 1800 to the present. And I am showing that unconventional oil here in orange is the largest new source of energy since natural gas, which is shown in red. Okay, and natural gas didn't reach that level until really the last 20 years of the 20th century. And so you compare unconventional oil with hydro, nuclear, solar, and wind, and it's more. So you can't ignore it. Okay, now you can argue and say, well, it's not the same. Well, it actually is more the same than it is different. And this is a meme. This is one of the half truths. Uh, Unconventional oil, certainly in the United States, where most of it is produced, is geochemically almost identical to the average oil produced from conventional fields. The only place in the United States where the oil is different basically is in the deep water Gulf of Mexico, where it's heavier and it also contains more sulfur, more sulfur. Most of the conventional oil that's always been produced in the United States is light tight oil without the tight. Okay, it's 40, 45 API gravity. That's exactly what unconventional or shale oil is. So that argument is just wrong. And as I said in the post, I mean, the only people that put money on the barrelhead, so to speak, for oil in the world are refiners, and they don't give a rat's ass whether the oil is unconventional or conventional. If it meets their refinery specifications and the price is right, they're going to pay for it. Okay, and that's something we just got to get over. Okay, we can have all the discussions and the arguments we want about, how it's riskier, it's scraping the bottom of the barrel, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to argue with those, but from a realistic perspective, you can't ignore it, and we have, and that's a mistake. That was wrong. Now, the other story, the other meme is that shale plays are about done. Okay, now I have published and spoken about how it's true that the shale play average well performance is not as good as it was a couple of years ago, and that has implications. Um, I have stated that in a lot of these plays, they've over drilled, and the wells are cannibalizing each other's production, and that's a big reason why the average well production has declined. But it hasn't declined so much that the wells aren't profitable, nor has it declined enough that they don't continue to produce. And so these are all the major shale plays in the United States. And what you see is that, and this is a projection, it's true through the end of 2024, and where things kind of get smoother is the projection. We can argue about that. That's obviously an educated guess, but the way I see it, the Bakken and the Eagle Ford are going to hang on, decline a little bit. The Permian is going to peak. We can argue whether it has or well, it hasn't, but some people think it has. But it's going to follow the same pattern as U.S. and global production, in my opinion, which is to say it's going to reach a peak plateau sometime in the next couple of years, and it's going to decline very slowly, maybe 0.5% per year through the end of this projection. But the other thing we've got to look at is there are 25 billion barrels of remaining proven reserves in these plays. You can't just say that doesn't, oh, that's nonsense. It's not nonsense. I mean, you can't just say in the United States, "Oh, I found a reserve and it's proven." You have to show that there's reason for it. And I've been critical of some of those standards in the past, but it's not a gimme. I mean, you actually have to have somebody who is a professional at doing this come in and say, yeah, they make a point here. There is some reasonable certainty that at current costs, not only do these reserves exist, but they will return to 10% rate of profit over the period of their life. And again, I don't want to get into the weeds with this, but you can't just say, "Oh, I don't believe it." Well, you can, I suppose, but I don't think that's a legitimate way to go forward. Now, most of the world, or certainly most of the analysts in my world, they think that existing fields are it, and that's not a totally bogus way to think about it, but they're not. Okay, I mean, that was the view that got peak oil in trouble. We said we don't think that that there are significant new sources of oil to be found, and we were wrong. Okay, and the people that say, well, the Permian's going to peak, and the Eagle Ford has, the Bakken has, and after that, it's the end of the world. Well, no, not exactly. This map shows what the U.S. Geological Survey recognizes as technically recoverable resources. Now, again, I've gone all, up and down a dozen times on what that actually means and why you shouldn't take it at face value, et cetera, et cetera. But you also can't just say, "Oh, it's not real." That means the one exclusion is what does it cost to get? Okay, and that could be a big deal. But if you notice, I mean, the USGS has identified 100 billion barrels in this category for unconventional in the United States, in the lower 48. 70 billion of those are in the Permian. Okay. I mean, and so I think it's very hard to make a case that the price or the cost of accessing those 70 billion is going to be radically different than the cost of what's been produced to date. I mean, there's some places where maybe these resources are at 30,000 feet. Okay, well that's clearly another story, or maybe they're underneath Chicago or something like that, and they're just never going to be accessed. But in the case of the Bakken and the Permian and very much of the Gulf Coast, which are the big sources, that's not the case. And so we can argue about how probable, but I got to tell you, I mean, I'm willing to bet that none of you have read the documents that have come out of the White House since Donald Trump, who I didn't vote for and never would, but was elected. I know his energy secretary quite well. Think very highly of him. In fact, he and I had dinner uh, in late November. Spent 2.5 hours talking about all this kind of stuff. We disagree on some things. We agree more than we disagree, but we definitely disagree. We disagree on climate change, for instance. We disagree on the advantages of continual growth. But Chris knows his stuff on energy, not just oil. He's not only an impressive guy, he's a formidable guy. And the plan is that they're going to use the same programs that the U.S. government used to underwrite and subsidize unconventional oil and gas projects in the 1980s and 1990s with tight gas, coal bed methane, shale gas, and shale oil to essentially reduce the price, the cost to these companies. And it could be 15, 20, $25 a barrel. So I'm not saying this is exactly what's going to happen. I'm saying, broaden your Overton window. And I'm not just talking to you guys that are listening to me talk here. I'm talking to everybody that I read every day, in the trade journals and online. Now, the most compelling information about peak oil was this period here from basically just before the great financial crisis until 2014. And what I want to show here is that those high prices were caused partly by peak oil. I mean, we sensitized everybody. We raised the awareness of a lot of people in the financial community, and they said, "Oh, maybe these guys are right. It kind of does look like these guys are right." And that unleashed a tremendous amount of investment capital, which resulted in finding a tremendous amount of oil, not just shale, but all over the world. Okay, and that ended up causing an oversupply of oil, which is why prices crashed back here in late 2014, early 2015. And I think that peak oil in general ignored the way that these supply urgency cycles work. But more importantly, again, this is something that industry looks at that we never did. This is what I'm showing here in orange and blue. This is what's called comparative inventory. It's simply how much oil is in storage in the world, in the OECD actually in this case, compared to its 5-year average. Okay, and so there's a lot. One of the peak oil memes is, oh, the only reason shale happened was because of monetary policy, easy money. That's not true. I'm not going to say that easy money wasn't a factor, but if it was, then you have to apply that to every industry in the country and every industry in the world, and then ask in that context, was oil somehow special? And I would say no. The reason that prices went up is because we went from a long-term surplus of comparative oil inventory to a deficit. I mean, this correlation is rock solid. It is as close to a 100% inverse correlation as you can get. And you can see that, okay, so we ended up in a gigantic surplus in 2014. That's when prices collapsed. Things got a little bit normalized, and then we went back up, and that was the late 2015, early 2016 bottom of oil prices. And as that mountain of oversupply worked its way down, price increased. And then in 2018, particularly with Trump withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal and putting sanctions on Iranian oil, that supply deficit increased. We've pretty much been in a deficit situation ever since. The Ukraine war really accentuated things. But look where we are right now. I mean, compared to where we've been the last 5 or 6 years, this supply deficit is just not that much. So, to be claiming, oh my God, any day now, price is going to go through the ceiling. Well, maybe it will. But the comment on the bottom is, again, a criticism that I direct at myself. But back when I was, pushing for peak oil ideas, I didn't know a thing about futures contracts, economics, credit markets, finance, monetary policy, or geopolitics in the way that they drive oil markets. I was just looking at supply and demand. Now here, what I've shown on the left is, this is Brent price versus supply-demand balance, and I think this is like for 2015 through 2023. And you cross-plot those up and ignore the COVID, and you end up with a correlation coefficient of 0.09. Okay, that sucks. I mean, that is statistically absolutely meaningless. And so much of at least the technical basis for peak oil was, supply and demand is going to run into a big imbalance and blah, blah, blah. On the right, I'm showing the same correlation between the chart I just showed you, comparative inventory and oil price. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's 0.72. It's pretty darn good. Okay, so the point here is not, we're so smart now and we weren't then. We didn't use the tools. We just didn't use the tools, and that caused us to, I wouldn't say make mistakes, but to come up with some observations and conclusions that were not consistent with the way that the real world looked at things. Now, almost at the end here. This graph shows, again, the people that actually put down money for oil. These are the trading contracts on WTI and Brent from the beginning of 2017 to the present. And what I'm showing in blue, these are long positions. These are people that are betting that the price of oil is going to go up. And the orange are short positions. And then the red is what's called the net long, which is the long minus the short. And then the upper curve, the orange curve there, is what's called open interest, and that shows how many contracts on oil are there. And without getting into the details, which I don't want to bore you with, the undeniable trend is that the number of people who are betting on oil is declining, and the number of people betting long on oil is declining long term. And even with the increase in oil price recently, with whatever, Trump and Iran and etc., we're still way below the average in 2017 to before COVID, and we're just barely at the average for the last 2 or 3 years. So markets, the people that actually bet their money on where we're going, are saying we see a decreasing sense of supply urgency over the last 7 years. Finally, even though climate change and ecological overshoot are two subjects that I take incredibly seriously, and I, as a lifelong oil, petroleum geologist, I certainly take oil very seriously. Neither of those, or all three of those, if you like, are what I think are serious risks over the next decade. Now, this is a chart from our friend Nate Hagens, and I want to give him credit for that. And you can say, well, Nate's wrong, and maybe he is, but I don't think so. And what Nate sees, and I agree, our biggest risks are that our financial system is overshot and it's going to collapse. Geopolitics, all the crazy wars that are going on, the complexity of the world and its supply chains are very much weak and suspect. The social contract, countries' ability to govern their people, and then the ecological damage that we're doing to the planet. These are the big risks. And, again, I'm not in any way diminishing that climate change or, obviously ecological damage goes with ecological overshoot. I'm not in any way saying that we shouldn't take those seriously, nor should we discount that peak oil is, somewhere out there. All I'm saying, or all that Nate's saying, and I'm agreeing with, is these are not the big issues of the next couple of years. That's what I got to say, guys. I'm hopeful that that we can have a discussion. What I'm not willing to do is debate peak oil. Okay, I'm not willing to say, oh yeah, but we can see peak oil in Yemen. Okay, great, fine. We can see that peak oil was real in Libya. Okay, great. I mean, this is sort of like the EROI argument that says, oh well, because EROI in Uruguay, they're running on renewables. That means that the whole world can. Well, the exception doesn't prove the rule, and we're talking about a global phenomenon right now. And the point that I'm making is that sure, I mean, there are places in the world that are depleting their oil supply. The UK is a great example. But that doesn't mean that there isn't oil. And that doesn't mean that there isn't oil at an affordable rate, at least for the people that refine it and put it in their cars. And I don't want to get into the details of, I don't want to have this devolve into a he said she kind of thing. I would like to stick to, to the points that I've made here and in my posts. And Andre, can you help me unshare my screen?
Yeah. So you just click on the same share icon. There you go. And I wanted to thank you for that wonderful presentation, and I found it very informative. And I did have just one question about it.
Sure.
Was the I believe in terms of the reserves you were showing, those were the 1P reserves. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and then the other question I had was the one where you had that beautiful map with the different reserves, 100 billion barrels. I'm wondering if that's like URR, or is that that remains to be extracted?
Those are technically recoverable resources.
Okay.
That means that with current technology, those are capable of being accessed and produced to the surface. The factor that is not included is what does it cost to do that.
Mm-hmm. And so just again to clarify, so this was at a certain year, this is how much was remaining?
This is as of 2020. Well, this is the 2024 report.
2020. Okay, thank you.
And you can look at, again, I'm not gonna. These happen to be the reserves as reported by EI. In my recent post, I think I showed IEA. I mean, there are all sorts of sources of reserves, and they vary. Okay, but I mean, at some point, I think you have to say, I don't believe these reserves, but they are notionally probably, plus. I mean, you can put whatever factor you want on them, but they are notionally probably correct. And if you want to discount them by 25%, fine. But again, remember, I took the tar sands out of them.
Okay, thank you. And I know there's several other people that have questions. So it's going to be Charlie, Ivor, and Roger. Okay, go ahead, Charlie.
And for Ivor, I don't want to talk about climate change. That's not what I'm here for. I saw your your chat note. I'm glad to talk about climate change in another time.
Okay, Charlie. Are you muted, Charlie? We can't hear you. Yeah, you're muted.
Hi there. Okay, yeah. Art, that was great, and thank you. It's as I understand. First thing I'd like just to show briefly. I'm going to screen share. Can I do that?
Okay. I'd rather you wouldn't, Charlie.
Okay. Well, I don't want to get into the weeds. I just was going to show a graph that I made published in 1975, which I think is not terribly different from what most of us would agree with, except I had too much coal, I think. Okay. So the difference between what I just published with Roger and John Larrere and yours really comes down, if I understand you properly, to the 70 million barrels that's in West Texas and New Mexico.
No. I mean, the chart that I used that was similar to what's been shown in that report, that shows the peak oil was sometime 5 years ago. Again, I don't know what ASPO data was used for that, but that's not with any kind of
okay. Well,
so that
Roger deal with that specifics.
So the unconventional supply or the research that has nothing to do with that chart. Nothing. Okay, that is not included in any that's another story that's out there. The production to date and the reserves and the production forward is based on existing proven reserves, not on some undiscovered technically recoverable resource.
Of conventional and shale oil.
I want to forget about this stupid distinction that doesn't exist in the real world. There is no distinction between conventional and unconventional oil. If you want to say that I'm going to exclude oil that's 10 API gravity or lower, I'll say fine. But unless you can tell me that unconventional oil is geochemically different from conventional oil, I'm saying that is, that is some kind of a conceptual bear trap. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, okay. I would agree with Art that currently the 2P numbers include unconventional shale sources as well.
Well, shale is fine, but all I'm saying is we're not, that 70 billion barrels in the Permian and 100 billion barrels. That's not a reserve. That's something on the side. That's the after dinner drink here. That's not on the menu.
I was pretty sure that it was included in the 2P numbers because those fields were discovered. And I know John Peach was showing us how there was kind of conventional era of discovery and then the fracking era of discoveries.
But we're not talking. I mean, okay. So look, we're talking about technically recoverable, undiscovered resources. Okay, if it's undiscovered, that means it hasn't been drilled.
Okay,
that means its existence is inferred from the fact that we know that geology is there. It's been penetrated, but it's undiscovered. Okay, so I have not shown a chart that goes beyond the end of 2026 because I want to make 100% sure that what I'm showing is a very reasonable extrapolation of what we know to be real today. And if you don't believe that, then chop off the right hand half an inch of that chart, and that is you can take that to the bank. I mean that's data through I think it's October of 2024, so it's several months old, and it's pretty darn close.
Okay, thank you. Ivor, did you still have a question? You still have your hand up. Did you want to mute? There you go.
Yeah. Well, okay. I can't ask a question about climate change, so I'm just saying. We have a lot. So, I mean, this is worldwide, or you're just talking the U.S. It seems to me like we're going to have enough to cook ourselves here.
Well, again, you have to pay attention to what I've shown, not only here but in the posts, and I'm very clear.
Yeah.
No, this is not just the United States. This is the world. I can show you the United States if you like, but I'm trying to be as broad and general as possible, and I'm not getting on your case here or anything. I'm just saying that a lot of times I sort of have to refight battles that shouldn't be fought because I've already said what this is.
Yeah. No, I like it. It's just the facts. I want to know, there you go.
Facts, and we can argue about how those facts will evolve in the future. But look, you guys know where I'm coming from. I mean, I would like nothing better than if peak oil projections had been real, because then we wouldn't have the kind of climate change issues that we're having right now. We would have been forced to address the infinite growth models that are so stupid and ridiculous. But it didn't happen. Okay, it didn't happen. All right, for a variety of reasons. And I'm saying, we broadcast a story that didn't turn out to be true.
Yep.
And we need to own that. We need to say, look, okay, we got some things wrong. In fact, we got a lot of things wrong. And as we continue, some of us, to produce more and more documents supporting that story that 99% of the world doesn't even bother to read. These little Muppets up in the balcony, why should we even pay attention to them anymore? I mean, we gotta get over this, guys. There is a peak oil story to tell, but when the facts change, we have to change the way we look at them and how we represent going forward. I have never abandoned my belief in the fact that peak oil is a big problem for humanity.
Yeah,
but we can't just keep beating the same old horse and expecting people to pay attention.
Yeah, I quit worrying about peak oil a while ago once I found out how severe the climate change is.
I know Roger has a question as well. Roger?
Hello, thank you, Andrii. Can everybody hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Loud and clear.
Art, very, very pleased to hear your talk. Very interesting. I'm completely with you. We won't go into any of the details. There are a lot of details, but we won't go into that. I'll just say two things, or three. One is, yes, I'm a scientist. I have worked very hard on the whole oil supply issue, worked with an awful lot of geophysicists, Reading University and other places, BP, many geologists, many who've drilled dry wells. So we have quite a lot. I don't have that experience myself, but I've talked to an awful lot of these to check all the data and the numbers. I have been privileged to have access to the oil industry data, the very expensive, very difficult to access oil industry data. It has affected my views of this whole issue. When we saw one of your first piece, Art, I wrote a few comments to Charlie Hall, and I thought, oh boy, I better write something a bit better. So I am in the process, Art, of writing a kind of a detailed response. I take all your points you've made today. Many are absolutely excellent. You are a scientist. You listen to the facts and so on. So I would just simply like to say, when I finished it, like all these things, it's not yet finished. It needs a bit more. I've got to do more on URRs, because that's clearly one of the big issues. And I'm in the same boat as you are on URRs. That 100 billion from USGS is right. There is much more of other sorts. The URR numbers are very big, and we've known that for years. But I'm simply saying, Art, I would love to send you my piece when it's done, hopefully by the end of this month. And I'd very much like you to read it. What I think is close to happening is your background, ours, all the data we have. We could all indeed reach a new and better consensus across the board between those who are the scientists like Charlie and us who work on all these things. I'd love to see a consensus. I'd love to see a discussion. We'll write it, send it if you're happy to look at it. I'm happy to have a phone call and stuff to chat it through. So
let's do both, Roger. As you know, I've always valued and respected your work and learned a lot from you and Colin and many of the others here. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to say you're wrong. And as I said, if I say you're wrong, I'm saying I'm wrong too. I hope I'm still part of this community. But all I'm saying is, we need a better story. And I've said the same thing to climate change. In fact, I wrote a whole post specifically on we need a better story. The story that we've told has absolutely flopped. Totally flopped. Not because it's wrong. We just didn't tell the story right or very well, and we need to think about that. I'd say the same thing for peak oil. We need a better story. We need to tell it, and Jonathan's sitting there shaking his head, and he and I just spent an hour together a week ago today talking about exactly these same things on our own little private Zoom call. And we need to figure out how can we communicate what we believe to be the truth. And let me say one other thing. I've lots of things to say, but one of the criticisms that I've gotten that I accept from some people, including my close friend Nate Hagens, is, oh, okay, I didn't really understand what you meant by a paradigm. Okay, because I was critical of the peak oil paradigm, and of course, I thought I made it very clear, but obviously I didn't. So I'm acknowledging that. And so there's a difference between a concept and a paradigm. Okay, and so the peak oil concept has never been in doubt, but a paradigm is a synthesis, a model that can be used to solve real world problems better than competing models. That's certainly Thomas Kuhn's definition of it. And peak oil has ceased to be a functioning paradigm. I mean, unless you define a paradigm as, oh, we're all going to die, so get ready. That doesn't really solve real world problems. It may be true conceptually, but it's not a paradigm. Okay, and so I think what Colin and John laid out in 1998 was a paradigm. It said these are these are the facts as we see them. This is what it means, and this is the way we need to use this information going forward. That's a paradigm. All right. The conditions on which that paradigm were based changed, and peak oil never changed the paradigm, and the paradigm therefore failed. So that doesn't mean that peak oil was wrong. It means the paradigm failed to work. Needs to be updated. Needs to be revised. Needs to be rethought. But yes, please send me that, Roger. I would be thrilled to do it. Let's get on a call together and talk about it.
Thank you very kindly, Art. That is appreciated. And Andrea, as I said, that once it's been looked at by quite a few people, once we got something that's a bit solid between us, then I'm very happy. I'm not going to put it into an academic paper. I'll put it into something general, and everybody can look at it. Thank you very kindly. Thank you, Art. Much appreciated.
So I wanted to say, just as Art was making a good point of the paradigms, and that it's not an empowering kind of message, and we do want to do that rural transition kind of to show people kind of that it's declining oil is not the end, that there's alternatives. I believe Simon has something prepared for us. Simon, I don't know if you can hear me. No. Or okay. Anyways, but so a few more questions, guys, and then we'll move on to the rural transition. So I believe next is Thomas. Thomas, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yes. I have two small questions. First one, maybe a naive question. What about the unchanged estimates for Middle East oil exporting countries? Aren't they overestimated? And the second one is to clarify a point about conventional and unconventional oil. As I understood, shale oils contains fewer heavy fraction, and therefore, without being mixed up with heavy oils, is not conventional oil, isn't it? So I didn't really understood why did you seem to be unhappy with the comparison between conventional and unconventional oil. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me again go back and restate what I've stated. We haven't talked about Middle East reserves, and I'm glad to do that. But let's take the part I've already been over and restate it. There is no geochemical difference between unconventional oil and conventional oil. Certainly not in the United States. And I can show you all the data. We don't want to do that here, but I mean, I have looked at every oil in every conventional and unconventional play, and the United States produces a very light, sweet, meaning low sulfur grade of crude oil, and always has since the beginning of, since 1859, when Colonel Drake drilled his first well. Okay, and light oil, the kind that is produced in the U.S. No, Andrii, that's not right. That is 40 to 45 is standard U.S. crude oil.
Yeah, and
okay, so that's the average. And if I take 40 API gravity oil and put it into a refinery, I get all kinds of gasoline and natural gas liquids and all the good stuff that the world ran on for the most part until after World War II. Okay, and after World War II, more and more of the world started running on diesel. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so our ships and our trains and our trucks and an awful lot of other things began the shift to diesel for a lot of reasons I won't get into. And U.S. crude oil is not very good for diesel because it doesn't contain very much of what we call the middle distillate components, the heavier components that are necessary to produce diesel. And for that reason, and diesel is the cash product of the world. And so in the late 70s and 1980s, the U.S. refining industry completely redesigned all of its refineries, billions, billions, and billions of dollars, so that we would be able to use our own light sweet crude to make gasoline and NGLs and all these other sorts of things. And we began importing heavier crude, mostly from the Middle East, to blend with it. That's not really the right word, but we put it into we say we blended it so that we could have the heavier components to manufacture the diesel. The heavy oil that comes from Canada, from Venezuela, from Mexico, and some of it from Saudi Arabia goes into a different part of the refinery. It's called vacuum distillation units, okay, as opposed to an atmospheric distillation unit. So you put it into a closed container as opposed to an open container, create a vacuum, heat it up with a furnace, and that separates out the lighter components, and you can use the heavier stuff to make diesel and kerosene and things like that. But the notion that there is something fundamentally different about unconventional oil from conventional oil is untrue. It's just untrue. Okay. So that's number one. Middle Eastern reserves. Okay, now we don't know. I don't know. Hell, I don't know what the reserves of Mexico are, because most countries don't have a rigorous process which they're willing to publish to the rest of the world. So I would say that 90% of the countries in the world are estimates of reserves or a guess. Now with the Middle East, and I know that that Twilight in the Desert was among the many sources of people saying, "Oh, we don't believe these reserves," kind of thing. And as I said in my post, I mean, Matt Simmons was a mentor, a friend, great guy, brilliant, but his background was not in oil. I mean, he wouldn't know how to estimate a reserve if you gave him all the data. He's a finance guy, and he was wrong. He was dead wrong. And we know that, at least in part, because in 2019, Saudi Aramco wanted to issue some stock for, I think, 5% of its company. And DeGolyer McNaughton was hired, their reserve auditor, to come in and audit all of Saudi Aramco's reserves. And the big surprise, for some, not for me, was that the reserves that Saudi Aramco had been advertising forever and ever were pretty much true. And by this time, we ought to know that, guys. I mean, if Matt was right, I think, was it 2005? I don't remember exactly when Twilight in the Desert was published. But, I mean, if he were right, I mean, Gawar would be dead. It's not. I mean, I interviewed a guy back right around that time. I was editor of the Houston Geological Society Bulletin, and I found a fellow here in Houston that used to be the chief refinery engineer for Saudi Aramco, and he'd retired. And he said to me, "Count the boats. Count the number of ships leaving the port at Dhahran, or wherever the hell it is in the Persian Gulf, and multiply by the number of barrels on each Aframax tanker, and that'll tell you exactly the right answer." So here we are 20 years later, and all those fields are still producing, millions and millions of barrels a day. Let's get over this idea that, that somehow it's a big lie. Do I believe that Saudi reserves are exactly what they say, or that DeGolyer and McNaughton got the exact right answer? Hell no. I mean, I've gone through so many reserve reports in my career. Many of them where I have to actually get on a witness stand and and put my hand on a Bible and swear that I'm telling the truth. No, there's a lot of interpretation in there, but if Saudi Aramco says it has 250 billion barrels, I say notionally that's a lot more correct than saying they're almost done. Okay, I mean, it's just these are desperate arguments by people who don't know. So that's I think, I thank you, for bringing those points back up, because I deal with them all the time, but they're not true. They're what I call memes. They're partial truths. And I think that so much of where we go wrong in life and in science, and I'm pretty sure it was Alfred North Whitehead who said this, is that when we deal with people with a high level of certitude, we can almost surely find that they have taken a partial truth and made it to be the whole truth. And that's kind of been my experience in certainly the 20 years of fairly public life, small fry public life that I've been in, is that I deal with people's questions every day, and very few of them are just wrong, but very few of them are right either. They have a partial truth in them. And in order to approach the whole truth, we need to include a whole lot more. We need to be into systems thinking. We can't just say, well, Yemen's production is declining, therefore the world is. Well, that's silly. We need, we can't just say what's the EROI of the world? That's what I want to know. I don't care what the EROI of North Dakota, Bakken is. I mean, what's the is the ROI of the world declining? If so, then that's worth knowing. But anyway, other questions, comments?
Thank you. Carlos, you're next. You have to unmute first. You gotta unmute your microphone, Carlos. We can't hear you. So there should be a button, a little microphone. You gotta click on it so that it's not.
Okay, now?
Yes, yeah. Now we can hear you loud and clear. Good.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm talking from Caracas. My concern with peak oil, Art, is mostly on the demand side, on the economic impact of importing nations. Unconventional oil is usually more expensive, generally, and that hits Europe, countries like Europe and Asia, really hard. Europe, as you know, imports about 97% of the oil that it uses, and they are barely growing economically. And my question is, because the GDP is very much tied to oil consumption. Mm-hmm. So my question is, can non-conventional oil be made more cheaper, more affordable? That's my question.
Okay, well, again, this is a meme. Unconventional oil is cheaper than conventional oil. End of story. End of discussion. I mean, I've done the work. I've done thousands, tens of thousands of decline curve analyses and run the full cycle economics on them. The break-even price, the average break-even price for a barrel of oil of the major producers in the Permian Basin is less than $50 a barrel. Okay, now if I want to compare that with a conventional play somewhere else in the United States, I need to add $20 to that. So this is not true. Think about it. I mean, these major oil companies are not stupid. Okay, so why is Exxon and Chevron and you name it? I mean, why are they betting their future on unconventional oil? Because it's cheaper. Now, it's true that the well costs more to drill. I mean, that's undisputable. Okay, but that's not the point. You've got to work out the economics. You have to understand what are the costs, all the costs, and what is the what is the revenue flow that results from all those costs, and how long does it take to pay off those very high costs? And so, I mean, I was probably one of the originators of the criticism of shale oil, that it has a very high decline rate. Okay, that's true, but that's not a bad thing. I mean, the more oil flow you get early in the life of the well, the more net revenue, the more present value you have. So I mean, I'm thrilled if my well depletes in 10 years and I make $20 million versus the same reserves that produce over 50 years and I only make $1 million. I mean, that's the way economics work. That's the way it works. So no, unconventional oil is not more expensive. End of discussion.
Yeah, I agree, like with Art for US, but I know Mohammed bin Salman said that they were producing in Saudi Arabia for $3 to $4 a barrel. But anyways, Dusty, you had a question?
Well, wait a minute.
Wait,
okay. That's lifting cost.
Lifting
that's
cost?
Just the cost of after I've drilled the well.
Yeah.
No capital costs. That is what does it physically cost me to run the pumps, bring the oil to the surface, separate it into oil and gas, put it in a pipeline. So that's not an untrue number, but that's not what I'm talking about. So I've done the numbers on Saudi Arabia from their annual reports and from DeGolyer and McNaughton, and their full cycle costs per barrel are probably $5 a barrel less than the Permian Basin top producers. $40 was the number I came up with.
Okay. Well, thank you for that number. Dusty, you had a question, and then I think Simon will have a presentation for us.
Yeah, here, good to see you. Question I got is how you mentioned the story earlier on. My question is kind of based around when I started coming across this peak oil discussion a few years ago. When I would Google, for example, peak oil, it would discuss the topic that we're talking about now. But now if you Google peak oil, it only talks about demand. So there's been a shift in the story or the narrative of that.
Right.
Do you see that as a good development, benign, or just kind of curious to get your thoughts on that now is what the term seems to mean in the zeitgeist?
Now, fair enough. So supply and demand are end members of the same spectrum. They cannot be, we could have kind of a cosmological discussion here if you wanted to, but I mean, you can't separate supply and demand. Obviously, if supply goes down and demand stays flat, then you have a deficit, and vice versa. But the discussion of peak demand, I think, is relevant because the world is moving in a direction. It's beginning, I guess you would say, is beginning to use less oil. And there are many reasons for that, and I don't want to get into them. One that's rarely discussed is the affordability issue. But the answer that you'll get from the mainstream is that countries like China, for instance, are in their efforts to reduce their dependency on imported oil, are putting more and more emphasis on running, say, their truck fleet on liquid petroleum gas. They're pushing EVs harder, and of course, that's a whole nother discussion about EROI and all those kind of things. But an EV, every mile or kilometer that an EV drives is displacing a certain amount of gasoline that's used. And so the idea is that for one reason or another, the world will be using less oil in the future. Now, we haven't actually seen that yet as a world, but we have seen that, say, in places like China and in places like the United States, that if you it's one thing to look at production, but it's another to look at consumption. And if you look at U.S. consumption, it is slowly declining, and certainly gasoline consumption has been declining now for many years. Production continues to be high, and that's because we export the oil. And so the fallacy in the peak demand argument, at least in the short term, is that for every barrel that, say, the UK chooses not to consume because of its green agenda, it's not as if that oil is going to stay in the ground. It'll go someplace else. Somebody else will use it. So, the world doesn't really give a crap about human statistics. The earth cares about the fact that, hey guys, fossil fuel consumption continues to increase, carbon emissions continue to increase, temperature continues to increase. You guys go pat yourselves on the back all you want, but hey, I'm feeling more pain every day. So, these are the kinds of things that, that I focus on. And I think this, this conventional, unconventional distinction is another one, that I think it was, was it Aldous Huxley or somebody like that said, that some ideas are so stupid that, that only intellectuals believe them. In other words, these are purely human constructs that don't have any basis in reality.
Right. So I guess bottom line of the question, is it good or bad? Shouldn't we, when you Google, shouldn't you say peak oil demand or peak oil supply? But I noticed when I just Google peak oil, it only brings up articles about demand, and I just wonder if that's
a
good story or a bad story, or neither.
The neutral story. Okay. People have, the one thing that peak oil did very well was the marketability of the term peak. We get 5 stars on that one. And so lots of other people have chosen to use peak because it works, and peak commodities, peak oil, peak demand. Peak demand is, I suppose you could say it's a good thing. If people demand less oil, then less of it will be produced. If we're in the climate change world, does it make any difference? No, because it's by the time we're just way outside the window of urgency for climate change for any of this to make that much of a difference. And by the way, when you look at its statistics on say EVs, EV sales are they're now 25%. Well, whoop-de-doo. I mean, that's new car sales. The question you want to ask is, how many EVs are there in your country compared to the total fleet or in the total world? And all of a sudden that 25% goes down to 2%. Okay, now that doesn't mean you should stop, that EVs are not worth something. It just means that, there's a lot of sales going on here. Everybody's selling, and this notion that renewable energy is somehow the good guys, they're the same corporate bastards that produce the oil. I mean, they're the same damn companies. And the guy who's the CEO of Total, he said it as clearly as can be. He said, we hear that renewable energy is so cheap. We don't see that at all. And in fact, because people are willing to pay so much money for renewables, we think that's a really good business for us to be in. There you go. There's your answer. China isn't leading the world in renewables because they're good guys. They're leading the world in renewables because they don't have any oil. And they're doing everything they know how to reduce their demand for oil because it's a huge vulnerability for them. Europe's into renewables not because it's such a great thing. It's because they don't have any oil. It's the only thing they have that they can use to try to soften the blow of their negative account balances. And in fact, I mean the French just last week led a whole set of war games in the Strait of Malacca. You know, that included Italy and the United States and all of that. Why? Because all of China's oil goes through the Strait of Malacca. And every time there's a crisis in the Middle East, we hear all about the Strait of Hormuz and, you know, oh my God, you know, all the oil in the world goes through. Hey, 4 million barrels a day more go through the Strait of Malacca than the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not minimizing the Strait of Hormuz. I'm just saying partial truths, guys. Most people don't know this stuff. China is hugely vulnerable on oil, and armies don't run on renewable energy. The Germans lost both world wars because they didn't have enough oil. The Battle of the Bulge was 100% about trying to go capture Eisenhower's gasoline depot in the Argonne Forest. They failed, and German tanks ran out of gas. That's why they lost the Battle of the Bulge. World War I was lost because the Germans didn't have enough oil. The Japanese lost the war in the Pacific because U.S. submarines sank all their tanker ships. They had plenty of oil because they stole it from Indonesia. They couldn't get it to their armies. By the end of the war, the average Japanese plane, MiG or whatever they were, the Zeros, they were flying 2 hours a month. You can't conduct a war without an air force in the Pacific. Now, these are facts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Art. That's really wonderful. Simon, I was wondering if you're ready with your presentation.
G'day, everyone. Yes, I can show you. I don't have a presentation, but I can show you what I'm doing, which I think.
Oh, okay.
I think you'll. Art, I would like to compliment you, mate. What you've just done is a very difficult thing. You've put forward a very complicated idea in front of an audience that may not like it, and you've done it with grace and you've done it with style. Thank you. I compliment you.
Andre?
Yeah. What is it, Charlie?
Is this being recorded?
Yes, it's all recorded.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah, so, we've got 37 live viewers.
So if I understand you correctly, Art, you've forgotten more about the oil industry than I'll ever learn. So I trust you on this.
Okay.
That your basic thesis is a whole lot of more capacity is about to be brought online by policies that are changing in the United States, and they're about to go bonkers, aggressively sourcing new material. As I understand it, that's what I think you're proposing. Yeah, and so I'm taking the keep an open mind. Let's see what happens. That doesn't change my day-to-day effort to get the post-oil plan on the ground as fast as possible. Quick, smart, please. So, anyway, well done, mate. Well done. All right. What I'm doing is I'm currently writing a report with Peter Sternlich about what would Hawaii do if it, state of Hawaii, if it was to phase out fossil fuels, what are the options? One of those options that are being modeled is if Hawaii was to completely source all of its food from permaculture and regenerative agriculture organic methods, and it was to be locally self-sufficient, what would that look like? The purpose of this is I work for a group that's working with the system circular economy, and there's an unspoken thing that fertilizers are coming from minerals, and there's a lot of work that's also been done, for example, to mass balance, mineral balance land that's been sterilized by industrial agriculture, and there is a push that I'm hearing from groups like the Club of Rome all the way up to every other sustainability group in the world, trying to push in the idea that we should phase out industrial petrochemicals, herbicides and pesticides. So there's an interface between the circular economy waste, the post-fossil fuel industrial sector, what might that look like, and where do we get our food from? And what's the interface and where's the line drawn? That's what this report in Hawaii is supposed to be about. Okay, so let me share my screen. I'll show you where I'm up to. Peter Sternlich is actually one of the authors on this. He's on this call too, so feel free to give him a hard time. Where are we?
So it's the third button on
the... Yeah. I've got like 10 things open. Are you seeing this?
Yes.
Okay, so what this is scenario HH. I won't go through the whole thing. This is still being written. It's being reviewed. This is about to go out to review, and I'm still trying to get the numbers to balance. So what this basically is making the case that we should actually source their food organically. So how do we do this? So well, we get like, what would a diet be for a single person? You know, like, and and then what would it be like across a year? Like how many servings? And then I've got the idea of a hamlet of 200 people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you've got like per capita, grams a day across this diet, kilograms a year. We're going for estimated average calories of 2,500 calories a day. And then we've got a mass balance of what we need to produce for 200 people, where people will work better in teams. So we've got the equivalent of a village of, say, 50 families of 4 or 200 people working together to grow food. What would they need? So, all right, we go through this thing like, well, there's rice. And so for each of the food products, we did this sort of thing, like, what do we need to produce our target mass of 16 tons of rice a year? How much arable land, how much fertilizer, how much water, and how much labor? I want to know, for example, when we get to the end of this, how much of the population will be required to be producing food. And so what's interesting is it turns out Hawaii is a very rich place. And so I did this for, rice, vegetables of various kinds. I did poultry meat production, egg production, but I also did this for pork, but I also calculated for beef. All right, you get the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so now let me show you some results. So just bear with me while I find it. Okay. This is, I'm still working. I work till midnight most nights, and I've got like 20 things open.
Fair enough.
All right. Okay. So are you okay? Are you seeing this?
Blank screen.
What about now?
With 4 slides.
Go to the second slide, Simon.
So,
okay.
Hang on.
Yeah. Okay. It says arable land required. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm going to share again.
Okay, sure.
Bash it till it works. Entire screen.
Mm-hmm.
Screen 2. Share. All right. Don't make me come down there.
Okay, we can see it. Yeah. Arable land required to organically produce.
Okay, so what we've done here is to bring everything to a level playing field. What would it take to grow 1,000 kilograms or 1 ton of each of these target foods, like rice, corn, soybeans, what have you?
Mm-hmm.
And all the assumption, for example, is everything's organic. All fertilizer is organic. Everything's free range. So we're not doing battery chickens, for example. But also, pigs and cows get to free range. Now, what's interesting is, you see like pork and beef at the end. There's a colossal amount of area they need, and that is so they've got free range, so they can free range around.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
If we actually did the thing where we locked them in a small container and fed them grain-fed feed just to fatten them up and no one knows, you get a different answer. But if you were to do this ethically, it looks something like that.
Wow.
All right, so take pork and beef away. And this is so all of these ones here are compressed.
Right.
Adjust the scale, we get that. All right, so here we have, this is a level playing field, 1,000 kilograms of each. Right, so this is where we are going. So the meat. So you've got the grazing land, but you've also got to actually grow feed, which is actually part of their diet. So that's a bit of corn, bit of barley, and a bit of oats. And that's for chickens. And you've got chickens laying eggs. So everything meat related is far more intensive in terms of area of land. Okay, back to Hawaii. If we were to do this for all of the population of Hawaii, which is about 1.4 million people. So what that is, it's about 7,200 of these hamlets extended out. It works out to about 0.56 acres a person to do this.
Wow.
Wow.
So, and that's about right, what people sort of calculate. So I'm more or less right. All right, so on the left, this is actually all that land split up. The top one there is pigs, free-range meat. So we're only talking about 10% of the diet is consuming not most, but a large chunk of the land, where the big chunk of it, most of this stuff is free-range for animals. So we could have a situation where crops are in rotation and they have periods of time that are going fallow. And then you could use these animals doing free-range to land stewardship. You could probably do something like that. Problem with pigs is they eat everything and they destroy everything. And what I'm actually looking at doing is, could you actually put pigs in a relatively small, if they need the equivalent of say 1 acre to be per pig in terms of free range, which is what they need for their mental health to be okay. All right, so if you do that, but if you're leaving them in there for longer than 3 months, they'll rip the crap out of everything, and it could be a substitute for ploughing.
Right.
Plowing. And the pig manure will fertilize and balance things out. Right. So the pale green is free range area, and the rest of it's growing stuff. Growing fruit and veggies is this band down the bottom. So if we went entirely vegetarian, we'd need less land. Problem is, we would, human beings, to be healthy, do we actually need meat? What I'm actually proposing at the moment is meat represents about 10, maybe 12% of the diet. All right, column on the right this is the arable land in Hawaii at the moment. So in terms of farms, this is what's actually operating in farms at the moment. So in theory, now actually convincing an existing farm that's got like a coffee crop or cocaine or marijuana, whatever that they're growing to make money. But to stop that and actually sort of start producing food, which they just buy from the supermarket, that's a tough ask. That's not the purpose of this report. This is to show that in theory it's possible. Now, where things got very interesting, let me share. Where things got interesting is when I actually said each of that land now has to be balanced up in terms of fertilizer. We need a certain amount of fertilizer of nutrients that now have to come from organic sources. And when things got difficult was the amount of phosphorus needed to balance everything up. And at the moment we get that from phosphate rock for NPK fertilizer. But we've got things like pig manure and chicken manure, and we've got fish meal, and we can grow kelp. But even so, with all those sorts of things, the limitation was phosphorus. And so I went back and actually took less soybeans out of the diet because they require more phosphorus proportionally per unit mass. And so you've got to balance this up accordingly. So the numbers aren't quite there yet. They're not quite, we've got everything to balance. But what this is basically showing is it is possible. So now what you can have as a situation is you can have like and it's looking like something like 1 in 4 people will have to be involved with growing food, which means, and you have to be physically involved to do that. It's going to be something like that. And so where we go from there is interesting. Anyway, so that's what I'm sort of up to. And Peter, this will be done on the next day or so, and you can do your magic.
So you're open for questions now?
Oh yeah, hit me.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I was wondering about because people also may have like firewood needs for heating or cooking.
Yep.
Though I know it's more limited in Hawaii, and you could use solar cookers for a lot of things.
Well,
So
I have a
I don't know
cunning plan.
Hmm?
I have a cunning plan. There's money
Okay.
in shit. Right now, so if we take human sewage and we put it into a pyrolysis plant and we turn it into syngas, that could be used as cooking gas.
That's also true, but I was thinking of the fuel would. I mean, the poop is often very good fertilizer, and you want to have a closed loop.
There's a balance here. Yes, we need a closed loop for Hawaii, but there's a relationship between pros and cons between what happens organically in food production and what happens in industrially. As in, society has to be seen as a system, and all systems must balance. And that's what I'm trying to sort of get to happen here. I'm trying to actually sort of get away from there has to be a relationship between food production and natural biosystems. Right now, at the moment, we used to move across these systems and like locusts and clean everything up and burn it, firewood. And in fact, in an emergency, that's exactly what we do. If we can have a thing where, all right, maybe we can burn some firewood, but the rest is used for fertilizer, because to make fertilizer, you need a 30-to-1 ratio of green waste to organic matter going in. So that these are the calculations I'm trying to do. If we can have a situation where we're not ripping up the natural environment and burning for trees, Steve Sanangelo did a very nice piece of work on the role of trees historically.
Yes.
Do we have to go back to that, or can we do a parallel system in that can we get organized in some other way? And if we can, it means the human system can start to withdraw from the natural environment and shrink in size. And that's the target I'm trying to hit.
And yeah, that you bring up great points. And I know in the transition plan I was thinking of you can actually probably do multiple stages for the human poop, because you can harvest methane out of it before you do any pyrolysis, and then using that methane you can do industrial processes like kilns and blacksmithing and things like that. And that's actually usually what used up the most wood in historical times is making charcoal. So you don't have to make charcoal as long as you have methane.
Yeah. But all of these things have to be mass balanced. Right. So you take a concept, you work out how much material do we need, how much material do we have, and mass balance everything off against everything else. And this is like the circular economy evolved into a completely new form.
Great. Does anyone else have a question for Simon? I also have a presentation.
Yeah, that's it. I'm done. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I will share mine, and just making sure. Okay. There we go.
Turn my microphone off.
Okay. And so decline is inevitable. So whether or not the current 2P numbers are accurate, or we have an extra trillion barrels, and we have a long plateau, like Art suggests, it's eventually going to decline. And so we have to, be cognizant of that. And this is the, collapse resilience cycle. And so it is possible to avoid the release phase by going from the peak civilization into the reorganization phase intentionally, by having, like, say, tree planting, or intentionally going over to villages. And now, as a kind of an empowering thing, so something that anyone can do is that I do every day is a prayer for sustainable transition. And it goes like this: may all beings awake and ascend in the line to the New Age Sylvan timeline, which is based on this book, that co-creates liberated robot civilization seeds. And there's an example. And forgiving, loving, and being kind to one another. Co-creating edible food forest communities where all our needs are met on site. With co-creation centers where we can make anything we can imagine. The libraries of knowledge to do so. And the spiritual practices to extend our knowledge. And so in post-decline, we have pockets of survivability, as Mathis called them. And so there's different factors to consider for those viewers, because I know a lot of viewers wanted to know about rural transition and like how do they pick a spot basically. So there's annual rainfall, proximity to waterways, geography, and community. So those are the different factors. So here you can see the annual rainfall map, and over there is Hawaii. And so anywhere above 250 millimeters annual rainfall supports food forests, with the kind of sweet spot of maximum biodiversity in the temperate areas is between 750 to a meter. And then for the tropical areas, there seems to be no real upper limit in terms of it can manage a lot of rain, basically. So here's a global plant biodiversity map. And what's interesting here is you will notice that this region over here has a fairly high biodiversity, even though it is fairly dry. And this has a historical reason. If you look into the history of North America, the California indigenous were actually some of the first people, at least in North America, to develop permaculture strategies. And so they actually started, instead of harvesting salmon in the California, they were doing oaks and acorns. And then as they moved into the drier areas, they went on to pinon pines. And so that's actually why, because of their efforts, we have a very high biodiversity here, as they helped cultivate many different kinds of plants. And history also indicates that the Amazon is also highly biodiverse because of the efforts of the people that lived in that region. So it is possible to increase biodiversity, and having increased biodiversity increases adaptive capacity. And so for an example of what a desert ecosystem, so if we go back here and we look at these, so the yellow and the orange, so these are the 275 to 474. So in around, like, in order to grow wheat, you need around 500 millimeters. And so our wheat belt is kind of like over there. And but these are considered like very dry areas. But you can see that Paradise Valley, Morocco, it's 2,000 years old food forest, and they get 300 millimeter annual precipitation, and they're doing just fine. And this is all using, old world plants. There's no cactuses, as you can tell, and cactuses are actually much better at water retention, and so you can actually have a desert food forest. And I didn't include the wetter ones because they're kind of more straightforward. Now there's water basin trading networks. So if you look here, you see that there's these large river systems, and it's much easier to transport things over water than it is over land. And the one thing that would be good is if we had more rail, because that's also fairly efficient. But still, water is the most efficient way, and especially in pre-industrial times. And this is a kind of a fun map of as if they were countries, if water basins were countries. And you can notice over here in Russia, they have a large number of these medium to large size water basins. And what they've actually done in Russia is that they have connected them all to create the largest canal system in the world. And it spans over 100,000 kilometers. And China has the oldest canal system in the world. And so this is from 2,500 years old. At least that's when they started making this, and it's now 40,000 kilometers long, quite extensive, and it is used regularly. So North America, it doesn't have much of a canal system because most of the canaling happened during the early industrialism phase, and it's in the East Coast. So all these green lines, these are kind of the canals that we have. We have more on the East Coast, and I don't know if all of these are maintained. But the point of this graphic is that it is possible to have a cross North America canal system if we simply have connection points here, and then if Trump wanted to, and Elon wanted to do a century project that will benefit the country for centuries, he could connect the Mississippi and the Columbia, and then the Gulf of America and the Pacific Ocean will be connected, as well as Washington D.C., all on the same network. And so there's another thing to consider when picking a spot, is the historical battles map. And generally speaking, if there's been a large number of historical battles in a region, then there may be a reason for that. And you generally want to stay away from those unless you have other good reasons. But these are also, some good climate areas. So in terms of geography, if plains have a tendency of attracting more raiders and kind of warfare kind of deal, and so you generally want to kind of head for the hills, if you will, during steep decline. And in terms of the biocapacity, so Mathis and just now Simon Michaux was talking about how Mathis was showing that we had 1.5 global hectares per person. So this is actually based on 1 global hectare per person, and then here, so this is using a whole acre. So and this way you have not just your core food but also backup food. And so the idea is that you could grow an annual crop in your core food, and then a permaculture crop in your backup food, and then you also have core wood as a short rotation coppice. Or see, this is a pollarding system. This is kind of a sustainable source of firewood, charcoal, or fertilizer, or what have you. And then a community is also very important, because no man is an island. And so China has a very similar model. I was talking to the Chinese on Red Note, and basically how they have it is that each village owns kind of a large segment of land, and then if you move to the village, you marry someone who's part of the village, then they can allocate you some land in the village. And so this kind of would give a very small footprint of buildup, allowing for most of it to go to agriculture and forestry. And then you can also still have it organized, using subsidiarity hierarchy, where you've got the family, community, villages, neighborhood, city, county, etc. All right. So I was wondering, did anyone have any questions on that? Nope. Oh, Ivor? Oh, we seem to have lost Simon. Ivor, yeah, you're muted.
So about an acre a person per person is kind of needed to keep people alive. That's a lot of arable land, actually, and I don't know if we have that much.
Well, the thing is that it doesn't have to be arable, because what happens is permaculture, as long as you can grow trees, you can grow food.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it doesn't have to be arable land in terms of tillable land. It just has to be able to support trees, and that's anything over 250 millimeters.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So that expands quite a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay. So I don't know if are we taking questions? John, did you have anything you wanted to present to us? I'll also check the YouTube here for.
So, other John, John.
Hey, John.
Got this published somewhere?
Which published?
Have you got that last set of slides published anywhere?
Oh, yes.
It's lovely because something that seems to be missing everywhere is a positive vision to aim for. There's not many people talking about a genuine positive utopia, and in the sort of the coaching world, if you don't have a positive vision and target, you're not going to get anywhere. So I think what you've got there is really verging on the positive. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad. And yeah, it's in the description to the video, the link for this presentation. And so here,
I have a little something too, if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
If it plays, I have a little just the very beginning of a film that we made.
Oh, okay.
I could see if it will share. I might need a little help with it.
Okay.
I think I got it. Okay, let's see if it works. If you can hear me at the same time, you may not be able to hear it, but let me see. Let me just start it. See if it works. Can you hear me too?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Probably can't hear the video, but
I can't see. I can't see a video.
Can you see it yet?
No.
Okay, maybe I have to do something else to share it.
Yeah, you probably have to do the share screen.
Okay, start screen sharing, right?
Yeah, start screen sharing, and you have to select a window.
That's what I'm trying to do right now. It doesn't want to go. What? Is it on now?
Nope. I guess we'll have to troubleshoot another time, Ivor. You're kind of freezing up.
Okay.
I think
I'm start screen sharing.
Loaded.
Yeah, it doesn't want to go. All right. Well.
Okay, we kind of lost you, Ivor. Yeah. All right. So I had some questions here. Will the proportion of oil coming from each region of the world change significantly over the next 10 years? I don't know if Art has an answer for that one.
I'm here.
Go ahead.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
It says, will the proportion of oil coming from each region of the world change significantly over the next 10 years?
Yeah, that's I honestly can't answer that. My sense is, look, United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia together produce, something like 15% or 20% of the world's oil. I don't see any diminishment in the output from those countries. There will be shifts for sure. I mean, the North Sea is, pretty much near the end of its road. But the simple answer is not among the major producers, and there will be adjustments accordingly. We're seeing, as Guyana and some of these new areas start to grow, Argentina is, really increasing its output. So we're going to start seeing, some of the important but more minor players playing musical chairs, I guess would be the simplest way to put that.
I have a follow-up to that because I've heard a lot of that the second largest shale fields were in the U.S., but the largest were in Siberia. And I'm wondering if you have any information on that. Are they developing that, or are they planning to? Or?
Right. Well, this is, that's been known for forever. And my information is that there is a certain amount of testing going on, but the answer is, again, we're talking about, we're in the realm of technically recoverable resources, and so to say it's the biggest in the world, well, okay, big deal, maybe. I'm not. I think there are some big problems making that work. So I wouldn't hold my breath on that. I think the plays that I would be watching most carefully are, of course, Argentina, the Vaca Muerta, but in the Middle East. I mean, this is an area where we know for a fact that the source rocks, which are what the shale plays are, these are among the richest, and they're all at thermal maturity. They're all at reasonable drilling depths and costs. Saudi Arabia has begun producing gas and condensate from some of these sources. So that's the area I would look at most strongly for now.
Thank you. And John Peach, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, Art, one of the things that I've been kind of looking at is that world production seemed to increase rapidly up till about 1970, and then it's generally been a linear increase after that. And so I've been questioning the whole, the sort of symmetric curve notion of peak oil for a while now. It just doesn't seem like it really fit the Hubbert model at all. And I noticed that it's sort of the same thing with U.S. shale, that it had this rapid ramp up. And it's not quite as smooth, but it almost looks like you could fit a straight line once it hit that point. And so I guess one of my questions is that, do you think that's happening because there's enough reserves that we don't have to keep ramping up, or is there just not enough demand to cause this Hubbert curve? It just doesn't seem like it fits the data at all. I mean, the model doesn't seem to fit the data.
Right. Well, that's a really good point that you make, and I've had the same objection for 20, 30 years. But so so to understand some of this, you have to understand history, and so the steep part of world production growth was after World War II. And the reason for that was that up until World War II, really the United States was the only country in the world that was an aggressive explorer, producer, and user of crude oil. It's, obviously every story is oversimplified, but that's basically it. I mean, in 1945, I think the U.S. produced 55% of the world's oil, something like that. So, so the big increase. I mean, and again, there's a lot of history here that I don't want to bore you with, but so much of. I mean, have you ever asked yourself the question, like, why were the early campaigns of World War II in North Africa? Well, that's because that's where the oil was. Mm-hmm. Germans were trying to get what oil they could away from the Ottoman Empire. Things that are not so well known. One of the major triggers for World War I was Germany was building a railroad that connected Baghdad and Berlin. And why were they doing that? Because they wanted the oil that was, that was in Mesopotamia. So the point I'm making is that after World War II, the world started converting to oil. And there was a ton of untapped reserves, not the least of which were in the Middle East. I mean, none of that. I mean, there were discoveries made in the Middle East in the late 20s and early 30s, but the development did not occur until after the Second World War. So a huge amount of production was unleashed right after the war, and then the price shocks of 1973 through 1981 gave tremendous incentive for more money to flow into oil exploration and production. And so I guess the simple way to think about that is, it's kind of a power curve function that probably 80% of the world's fields were discovered by 1980 or 1985. And so, and then factor in what you mentioned is once you've got a reserve base, then there's less incentive, economic incentive to go try to stockpile more spare capacity that can't be monetized.
Right. It was just the production seems to be, almost linearly increasing since about 1970. There wasn't that rapid increase following 1970. It just kind of maintained a steady growth after that. And the other thing that I'm wondering about, I don't have the access to the data that you do. So, at best I can get what, BP published or whatever. And so what I did was I went back and looked at discovery data. And, it looks like discovery peaked in the mid 60s and has been generally declining ever since. But I'm finding this huge disconnect between what is claimed discoveries and what's claimed as reserves. That it seems like there's much less discovery than there are reserves, and I'm wondering, is my data source wrong, or what's going on there?
Well, those are good questions. So the whole investigation of field discoveries is mostly limited to giant fields, and even there it is somewhat incomplete. And giant fields, of course, are important. Again, but most of that kind of data does not include all the small fields that cumulatively or in aggregate make considerable contribution to the total. So some of the disconnect is because of that. I early in my independent career, I paid a lot of attention, and it was because of peak oil. I paid a lot of attention to giant fields, and honestly, I almost never go back and look at that anymore. I'll be glad to share with you the giant fields database that I have. Nobody updates it anymore, but I'm happy to send it to you, and there's a lot of good information in there. But nonetheless, I think that reserves are the way to go. And even though I have said I don't have great confidence in BP or now EI or IEA or EIA, I think they're reasonable. Discount them by 25% or something. That's probably right.
Okay, so I'm going to have to greatly revise my thinking here, because I was kind of thinking that the reserve numbers were the least reliable and that discoveries were next most reliable, and probably production was the most reliable because you've got two parties, right? That somebody's selling the oil, somebody's buying the oil, and so production is probably the best numbers. But I think from what you're saying is that I should look at it the other way, and that discovery data that we have available is really not covering a lot of little stuff that is going on, that they're just not including it because it's not big enough to go into their charts.
Well, and what I'm also saying is I don't know who, if anyone, is continuing to update that data. So if you had a global production database, which I don't, you could presumably deduce all of that for yourself. But even so, even looking at U.S. production, you get back past 1980 or so, and it's kind of sketchy. So I would say that, I mean, production is the most reliable data that you have.
Right.
But production doesn't necessarily reflect reserves.
No.
So
Yeah.
it depends on what you want to know.
I guess the reason I was doing this was that I thought, okay, production is good, or, reasonably good, and I wanted to take the difference between discoveries and production and say, okay, that's a proxy for reserves. But I think maybe we need to rethink this and say, no, reserves are better, and add that onto production so far, and that will tell us a better story.
I think so.
So, what about backdated 2P? Don't people update that? Isn't that what backdated means? Or I thought.
Where do you get that? Where do you get that from? I guess is the question.
Well, I was getting it from John.
Yeah. Well, I poke around and try to find the best data I can, but I'm not an oil expert at all. I just been trying to collect the data. So.
Right.
So you said you were getting it from EIA.
Oh yeah. So I get production data came from EIA and BP, or now EI. Discovery data is scattered all over the place, but from what Art's saying is that that's just the big fields, and that's kind of ancient history anyway. So maybe we need to look for either better discovery data or reserves. And I was trying to get away from reserves because I wasn't sure about that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're the safest way to go. I mean, IEA has. I mean, you can just go on their website and you'll find. Or I think I posted a graph, not in my most recent peak oil post, but the one from 2 weeks ago, that actually shows the proven reserves and then some other category which would be equivalent to your 2P.
Yeah,
it's very, the point is they're very big numbers. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I think something I didn't mention with the larger group, but I'll say it to the smaller group, is that, I mean, geology is not the most important determinant in all of this. Really, it's capital availability. I mean, whatever reserve number you think is right, is certainly kind of a. I mean, it's a monument. Okay, that's what it is. The bigger question is, well, is there the will or the capital available to develop that? Given it's a very large number. And I've used a quote that I sort of modified from some financial guy, which is that oil's last rites will be read by credit markets.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is true for empires, by the way. I mean, most empires fall not because they're defeated on the battlefield, it's that nobody will lend them money anymore. I mean, world conquest and dominance is a very expensive business. And so the Spanish Empire fell because they didn't pay their bills. And whenever creditor countries or institutions would send people to Spain, they get thrown in jail. And so the investors in Europe said, well, screw this, we're going to start investing in the Dutch because they pay their bills. And then the Dutch replaced them as the next big empire. And the British Empire collapsed for the same reason. Go back and look at the history of the Boer War. I mean, what was that really about? I mean, it was about gold reserves is what it was. And Britain needed to enlist its entire Commonwealth to fight the Boers to a stalemate. That was the beginning of the end of the British Empire. They didn't have enough capital to maintain their empire. Same with oil.
Wow. Well, fascinating stuff. I guess no one has any more questions. Art, did you want to make a closing statement?
Well, not really, except to to thank you all very much for being a gracious audience, and I I guess every once in a while I get a little I guess I get a little heated about when people when people don't hear what I just said, and maybe some of that's a language problem, and I apologize for any annoyance that I might have expressed. But on balance, I'm very glad we had this conversation. I think Simon's work is absolutely crucial. Whatever scenario or paradigm that you use, I think we all see an end to the way things are, and I think we very desperately need to be able to aggregate the good that we've known and learned, and somehow preserve that, in the same way that, gosh, if it hadn't been for St. Patrick, visiting Rome in 401 or whenever he did, right before the Visigoths sacked it. I mean, he brought back Aristotle and Socrates on a mule, and had it not been for for his monks copying all that stuff, Western civilization may have been lost. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think it's not only crucial, it's commendable. The guys with the brain power of Simon Michaux, my goodness, what an impressive guy. We're somehow trying to to condense and summarize all of this so that we can pick up the pieces, and as my friend Nate always says, have the next starting point be better than the default, which would be really bad. So I'm very much in favor of I think Simon is just a unique fellow. My goodness.
Great. Thank you. So I'll round up the stream. So as we found you, we leave you in the love and light of the one infinite creator, the one within you and all around. Go therefore rejoicing in the power and the peace of the infinite creator, my friends.
Thank you all.
All right. I've ended the stream, and even though it looks like a small group, we actually